So in this video, we're going to talk about how to conduct the rolling wave planning. So to begin with, there's really just two parts to the rolling wave planning process. Part A is some preparation that the team does, chiefly the project manager and the summary task owners, those people that are owners of portions of the plan. The purpose is to make sure that they take some time in advance of the meeting to update their portion of the plan, both from a maintenance perspective as well as from a strategic thinking point of view. And that'll make the rolling wave planning meeting that much more effective. And there's 3 steps that we're going to ask them to do in preparation for the team meeting. And then there's part B, which is the actual rolling wave planning team meeting. And that's where the team is reviewing the health of the project and looking for ways to either stay on track or to get back on track. So part A, in terms of getting prepared for the meeting, the summary task owners mostly, there's a couple things we need them to do. One is we want to look for any active tasks that are out of date. You know, if you have the warning icon in your row here that says you have active tasks that end in the past that aren't marked complete yet, you'll want to resolve those. And secondly, you want to be looking for any task that's planned to start in the past. And you want to move those to sometime in the future. And you want to be a little careful about, you know, where you move them to. You don't just want to move them to tomorrow or the current day without giving it some thought about you know, the other tasks that are on your plate. You want to try to balance the work and try to figure out realistically when you think you can begin working on these tasks. Some people will kind of ask, why is this a big deal? Well, it's a big deal because the slack and the criticality of a task, you know, the fact that it's yellow or orange or pink, that's determined on its current start date in the game plan. So if it's currently planned to start on a day left of the green, in other words, a day in the past, its slack and perhaps criticality aren't really accurate. Slack for sure, criticality maybe not. So when we move those tasks forward, that's when it's going to update the slack calculation and possibly change the color because perhaps the criticality is also changed. And it takes a little more thought than just arbitrarily moving everything day for day, one day forward. If we had Playbook just do that automatically, what would happen is we'd be like bulldozing our tasks day for day into the future, creating a bigger pile of work that is unrealistic. Or, you know, the pile grows from 6 hours of work to 10 hours of work to 20 to 50 to 100, and we don't have a realistic timeline. So therefore, we don't have realistic expectations. So therefore, it takes a little more thought. Secondly, we want to look at our current iteration. If you remember from the what's rolling wave planning about, we talked about having a current iteration that we're working on right now, similar to a sprint. The time frame might be 8 weeks, it could be 4 weeks, it could be 6 weeks, you know, might vary a little bit, but the idea is we want to revisit the plan for the short-term work that we're doing in the current iteration, and we want to make sure that the plan is still valid. You know, has anything changed? Do we need to create new tasks or create new dependencies? Are there any new risks that we need to address? Maybe we need to plan mitigations for those risks and then put them into the project plan as well, linking them in, assigning resources, et cetera, because all that's real work that needs to be done. Also, we want to make sure that at least in the current iteration that there's no unassigned tasks. If it's unassigned, we don't know which resource it will be doing it, and so we lose visibility to the loading on the resources. We want to make sure we have good realistic plans with logical dependencies as well as realistic expectations for workload by resource, by person, and that means that we can't have any unassigned tasks in the next or in the current iteration. And then the next step is really a more strategic type of step. We're starting to look out to the next iteration, and we're starting to plan some of those details. Where we had placeholders, we now begin creating our outline level of detail, whereas in the current 8 weeks, we need really good detail. And so we might spend a little bit of time during this preparation phase, looking a little farther out, start giving it some thought, start laying out, the detailed work that needs to be done. And with rolling wave planning, we'll be revisiting this every week, at the most, maybe every other week. So we'll be sure to keep the plans up to date, fresh, and accurate. And that's going to help us to execute in a much more smooth, fashion, learn earlier, reduce the things that cause delays unnecessarily because we learn about them later, to a minimum, things like that. Last but not least, we want the summary task owner's project manager as well to do some analysis. Take a few minutes, takes 5 minutes. Check check the resource loading for the resources that you're utilizing for your work, and just check to make sure that they have a realistic amount of loading. Realistic generally means that people's average availability to do project work is maybe 5 hours a day. And so here in our mind's eye, we can see 5 hours, and we're consistently overloaded. This resource is consistently overloaded during that time frame. So that tells us that we don't have a realistic amount of time or built in to our project timeline, or it means that we need to get this person some help and do some parallel processing, or we need to de-scope and not do all the work. There's different things that we might do, but we want to be aware that our project plan has an unreasonable amount of loading for the resource, especially our critical resources, the ones that are on the critical path. And we want to make sure we're prepared to discuss those with the project manager and bring those things to the project manager's attention. So the Part A piece, primarily for the summary task owners, we're talking like 30 minutes a week. It's the kind of thing that if you stay on top of it, shouldn't become a large amount of work. We're not trying to revisit the plan out to the very end of the project. We're just looking out the next 8 weeks in really good detail, and then the 8 to 16 week time frame as an outline level of detail. So shouldn't take a lot of time. Part B is the team meeting. And in this meeting, we're primarily focused on the health of the project. In other words, schedule risk. How are we doing in terms of our likelihood to meet our commit date? And so we want to find a way to assess the health of the project. And if we're healthy, we want to make sure that we're prepared to stay that way. We know what work is coming and we're ready, et cetera. If we're unhealthy, if we're at higher level of risk, we want to see if we can identify ways to get back on track, find ways to save some time, and maybe we can get back on track. So things that are kind of out of scope are, we're not trying to have an in-depth discussion of everything we've done in the past. We won't have time for this anyway, and it's not really value added, other than maybe just what happened in the last week, and that's fine. We're not going to have time to review every task in the plan. What we're going to be focusing on is at the critical path and the near critical path. And we have to be cognizant of the fact that we like to get into in-depth technical discussions, but this is not the place for those things. It's great to highlight those, bring them to people's attention, and then we can say, well, let's set up another meeting to have that conversation, et cetera. As far as health of the project is concerned, we use the buffer chart linked, at the end of the milestone, so as a way to assess health. If we're in the green area of the chart, we know we're at low risk of missing our commit date. If we're in the yellow zone, we're at an elevated level of risk. Red, we're at a high level of risk. Doesn't mean we're going to miss our deadline. We're just at a higher level of risk. We should have more contingency at this portion of the project to absorb variability, and we don't have as much as we would like to have, so we're at higher level of risk. So since the last rolling wave planning meeting, we want to see if there's been any sharp inclines since the last meeting. Maybe we're right here and none of the other plot points exist yet. Maybe this is the current day. And for this meeting, we've used up some buffer, quite a bit of buffer this last week. What caused it? We want to make sure that we understand what caused it, because we want to make sure that we try to avoid repeating that from happening again on this project, as well as it could be something that would apply to other projects. So maybe this is a lesson learned that we can apply to other projects as well. So that's why we want to do that. And then what our goal is like if we're here in the red, we're trying to find something we can do to save some time and regain some buffer, you know, see if we can regain some buffer, have our milestone move backwards, in other words, from right to left as opposed to left to right. So the vertical axis is our time axis in the project plan. Some ideas there might be, we might be looking at the plan, looking at the critical path, and we might identify an opportunity to offload some of the critical work to more than one person and parallel process some of that work and get the work done sooner. We might be able to offload the work in the form of subcontracting the work. We might be able to just expedite an order if it's on the critical path and we say, well, the suppliers quoted us 4 weeks, maybe we can pay $1,000 and get the part in 3 weeks, save a week. We might be able to change the scope, do less work. If we're talking about project scope for the product, that's probably a tough sell, because we're saying, you know, let's take like developing one of the features out. Maybe a possibility. It's just usually a more difficult thing to actually try to arrange or to be able to do. Another form of changing the scope, though, might be we may have a lot of risk mitigations identified, and some of those we would love to get from low to closed, you know, from high to medium to low, low to closed. Maybe we have to just forego closing out all the risks and be able to accept that we may have to go to market with a little more risk than what we would like. That may be a form of changing the scope. And then last but not least, the team might want to rebuffer the project, you know, make it longer so that we're not, quote unquote, missing our deadline, we're not late. That one is a tough one as well. There needs to be a business process that the team needs to go through in order to get approval to change the size of the buffer. And probably most of the time the answer will be no, you can't change it unless there's good rationale. Like maybe the business has added more scope to the project, and that gives you an opportunity to identify the additional work that needs to be done and roughly how long it'll take, and consequently you'll be allotted more time. You'll be able to increase the size of the buffer. But otherwise, we won't just be able to go change the size of the buffer. That's not the right answer. So what we generally do in this is we have Playbook up on the screen. We're reviewing the plan, focusing on the critical and near critical tasks for the current iteration, chiefly for the current 8 weeks, whatever now to 8 weeks out is. We're making sure that the plan's up to date, accurate. We're reviewing the summary tasks owners' changes and their proposals for changes and for ways that we might save time. And the goal is to make sure that the team is aligned, you know, that we have clear goals, priorities are clear for what we're working on right now and what's, you know, coming up next as well. It's kind of like people rowing a boat. We want to make sure everyone's rowing in the same direction at the same time. We're trying to maximize the effectiveness of the team. Also, this is when the ideas for how to save time on the critical path, we should be talking about those. We want to check just to make sure everything's got known slack and criticality. There should be no brown tasks. Brown task means we don't know the slack, therefore the criticality is unknown. And we're going to make sure that all the tasks are assigned resources. One quick way to see that is if a task has a white flag next to it, it has no assigned resource. So watch for that. Next video will be about, hey, what tools are there in Playbook to help me do my rolling wave planning prep? and the execution of the rolling wave planning as well. So be on the lookout for that. Let us know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching.